you will see that it is near pristine. As a matter of fact, its nose, the cone, the sides of the bullet are completely intact and unscathed. It has only minimal protrusion of the lead core at the base, in the same fashion that the two bullets did that had been fired in the test wadding. That's from the impact of the firing mechanism.
Some ballistic experts argue that the Warren Commission should have test fired through two bodies instead of just one. They say the single bullet would have been slowed down by passing through Kennedy's neck before entering Connally's body, and a bullet that is slowed down is less likely to be deformed. The single bullet also was examined to determine if it is chemically identical to the bullet fragments removed from Connally's arm. Critics were convinced they would not match, and thus the single bullet theory would be proven wrong. Congress asked Dr. Vincent Gwynn to use a technique called neutron activation analysis to find out.
What I did in the analyses was to take very small pieces of each of the samples and put them in our nuclear reactor, bombarded them with neutrons, and that made some of the elements present in the bullet lead radioactive. Then I counted them, each sample, on what's called a gamma ray spectrometer, which detects the different radioactive elements.
This enables Dr. Gwynn to measure them to learn if a particular sample is chemically identical to a particular bullet.
The fragments that were recovered from Governor Connally's wrist matched in composition the bullet lead in the so-called stretcher bullet.
It is possible that other bullets manufactured at the same time would have very similar composition and could also have been the source of the fragments. Nevertheless, Dr. Gwynn's results support the single bullet theory, but don't prove it. And why the bullet is not as misshapen as the test bullets remains an open question. Dr. Weck urges a new firing test to help settle that issue. Was it possible for a single bullet fired from the 6th floor of the Schoolbook Depository building to go through the bodies of both the president and the governor? The FBI restaged the shooting for the Warren Commission, which concluded that the angle of trajectory was feasible. But looking at the wounds, Dr. Shaw disagrees.
I couldn't quite understand why a bullet going through the president's neck, coming from the right and above, exiting out through his throat, would then zig and zag to strike the governor who was sitting directly in front of the president. It would seem to me that that bullet would have struck the governor in the left side of his chest rather than the right side of his chest.
It appears initially that Dr. Shaw is correct. Photographs showed Connally seated slightly to Kennedy's left, and the location of their wounds suggests they were hit by two separate bullets, not by a single bullet fired from the 6th floor. Looking at the limousine from ground level, the bullet paths also don't line up with the 6th floor. The path of the bullet through Kennedy's neck goes slightly downward and doesn't line up with the wounds through Connally, which goes sharply downward. Dr. Bodden.
The bullet path through President Kennedy's back and neck indeed was in the anatomic position at somewhat of an upward angle through the neck, slightly upward. But this is entirely consistent with a bullet trajectory coming from above downward at a 20-30 degree angle if the president were leaning forward at the time that the bullet struck him in the manner that I'm doing. Now, as far as Governor Connally's wound goes, it was going downward, and it would be entirely consistent with entering if he were leaning backwards slightly. So one way in which a single bullet could readily accommodate the president and Governor Connally would be the president leaning slightly downward and the governor slightly backwards.
The model suggests that from this point of view, the angle of trajectory for the bullet path could line up and lead back to the 6th floor window. What about the argument that the bullet had to zig and zag to strike both men? But the model shows that if Connally had moved just slightly more to Kennedy's left, perhaps when he turned to look over his right shoulder, which is what he said he did, Then the angle of trajectory for the bullet path could also line up. Additionally, a bullet doesn't always travel in a straight line after it enters a human body, as this Army ballistics film demonstrates. When a rifle bullet is fired into a block of gelatin simulating human flesh, it can change direction. So the gelatin test demonstrates that the bullet could have changed direction as it went through Kennedy's neck, even without striking bone, and changed direction again after it entered Connolly's chest. And the computer model suggests that the bullet pass through both men could line up. Despite all of the efforts by critics, the single bullet theory has yet to be disproven. But the fact that the single bullet theory cannot be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt contributed to the search for another gunman. And there already was evidence suggesting there was a second gunman firing from the grassy knoll.
There's numerous people running up the hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Simmons Freeway. Several police officers are rushing.
From the moment the president was killed, many eyewitnesses testified that they believed there was a man with a gun on the grassy knoll. One eyewitness was Malcolm Summers, who reenacted his experience for Nova.
After the motor van had passed, I waited about a minute, and then I came running over across to the knoll. When I got here, I was stopped by a person in a suit with an overcoat over his arm, thrown over his arm. Also had a gun under his arm. It looked like a little machine gun to me, a small machine gun.
Malcolm Summers was one of several eyewitnesses, including at least one Dallas policeman, who ran into people claiming to be federal officials and who were never found. Chief Counsel for the House Assassination Committee, Robert Blakey.
A careful examination of where all of the Secret Service agents were that day and their duty assignments indicates that no Secret Service agent was in that area.
Another eyewitness, Skinny Holland, watched from this overpass. Josiah Thompson interviewed Holland for his book.
He said that he and 6 or 7 of his fellows also saw some puffs of smoke come out from under the bushes near a stockade fence on the grassy knoll. This meant so much to them, they ran right over there as soon as the shooting was over. About 15 feet down from the corner, he found some fresh footprints, some cigarette butts, indications that somebody had been there.
Memories can fade, but photographs are fixed in time. This perhaps was the most photographed murder in history. And critics thought they saw a gunman in at least 6 different Dealey Plaza pictures. This man appears to shoot directly at the camera, but photo analysis revealed he was only lights and shadows. Critics said this open umbrella was a CIA weapon, which the man holding it used to fire a dart that paralyzed Kennedy in the neck. But a witness told Congress he was the man with the umbrella, and he had held it open to make a symbolic political statement.
Committee staff opened this umbrella so we can ascertain there's no dart gun in it.
They're, as far as I'm concerned, they're certainly welcome to.
Maybe you ought to turn that way with it.
Congress hired a group of experts to examine all the photos. In this one, the limousine is in the foreground, moments before Kennedy was first wounded. On the grassy knoll is a shape resembling a black dog. Photo analyst Bobby Hunt.
It is a black shape, apparently the head and shoulders of a man. In the region of what we'd call the face, there was some pink tones, purported to be flesh tones. And there was also an object which looked like a rifle with a flash suppressor or a nozzle on the rifle. Well, we concluded that this was a human being. That conclusion was derived from the enhancement and from some color spectrographic analysis we did on the visible flesh tones of the object. We did not conclude, however, that that was a rifle. We simply said it was consistent with a blur induced by the motion of the photograph.
Critics argued this picture showed that same person from another angle right at this point in the photo. The Congressional Photo Team decided not to enhance it because it was too deteriorated.